Welcome to Video 5. So today we're going to be talking about open world, Sandbox, baby.
Yeah. It's a world where we really wanted players to feel empowered to do anything they wanted. That's the big goal. And that part of our inspirations were some of the past projects we worked on and some of the things we saw out there. But this is a world where you're moving around, you're interacting with a lot of different things, and you can pursue your personal storyline, which we talked about in the last video. You can also just do work for the factions. You can hunt after bounties. You can just kind of explore the world and just see what encounters come up and how that changes the context, right? The encounters have a rippling and lasting effect on things, and that changes the context of your decisions, of what's important and what's valuable. It might change some of the scoring conditions and that sort of thing. So, one of the big challenges for both of us, I think, was really creating an open world, but also giving players the handrails to so they're not feeling just overwhelmed and lost on their first play. We found kind of early on that people were like, well, on their first turn we explain everything, and they say, well, what do I do? Yeah. So what do you do?
Well, how you address a lot of that in the game is by giving players goals, right out of the gate. So you want to motivate, or as we game designers say, induce. We want to induce players to do the things that they should be doing anyway.
It's a weird word.
And then by doing that it should reinforce moments that feel good. So I'll go, for example, maybe a character's you need to get back three gear cards. Well, you only start with 2, mm-hmm. right? Some characters might start with more. So that would mean that you need to go buy a card, right? Mm-hmm. And not only would you need to buy a card, you would then need to use all 3 of your cards. Well, using your cards will be fun and rewarding. And then you're going to go over here and you're stand next to one of these little pylons, and that's how you get your cards back. You'll get all your cards back. Now you've completed your goal. Mm-hmm. It's going to let you move forward in the story. So you're falling forward at all times in the game. Right. So this is telling you, go buy a card, go use your cards, get your cards back so you can have more fun with them, mm-hmm. advance your story. So it's positively reinforcing lots of things within the game. And then once you kind of flag some of those moments for a player, they'll kind of go, oh, cool, I want to do that again, or that was useful. And then you present them with a new challenge.
Or maybe they say, I want to try something different. And sure. You have plenty of options. This is just a nice buffet of things,
there's
right?
Distractions galore out there. Distractions galore. But the primary driver in terms of the game is going to be your story and your feats. So, scoring victory points, there's ways to score victory points, but one of the best ways to score victory points in the game is going to be by completing a feat. Right. You'll do this little legend loop, and then when you get to the end, you're going to score points equal to what the chapter that you're in. So if you kind of just sit around and don't focus on your main story and you're getting tons of legend, mm-hmm. that's half as efficient as if you just moved to chapter 2 and then tried to do that same thing. Yeah. So there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship between those things in the game.
Yeah. One of the big drivers for these feats is we wanted to make sure they're what we call intersectional objectives, and that's kind of a weird word, but the idea is that this objective here, it's not necessarily the single focus that you want to have. You don't want to just a line drive right towards it. This is something that you can do while you're doing other things. So the idea is we really wanted to give players something to go for, something clear and transparent. They say, aha, I know exactly how to do this. I have the means that I can control this. But also, while you're on the way to that, you can stop and smell as many flowers as you want, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Which is something I like to do.
Right.
So even within the feats, then there's things like jobs, right? So how a job works in the game is you go and you talk to one of these representatives from a faction. Mm-hmm. They're going to give you a reward. If you have a certain resources available, you can pay them to get some really cool thing, and then they're going to give you a job. And what that job is going to do is that it's going to go in the slot for that faction, and it's going to provide you with a little quest, a little objective. If you complete that, then you're going to go get these things called reputation. Look at that right there in my hand. Perfect. So the reputation are yeah, that's a better, good job. So the reputation you can spend to get really powerful special cards.
You're in with the faction. They trust you. They're going to give you.
They're spoils. Yeah, they're giving you out. They're kind of opening the vault and letting you walk in and take an item and walk away, right? And you'll also get victory points. So there's a lot of. So for example, the jobs when you complete a job, you'll get a legend, mm-hmm. and then you'll get the reputation, right?
Right. Everything feeds everything else. So you
Yeah.
do one thing, and you have two options ahead of you.
And you might complete a feat by doing a job. It might be like you needed to like roll a certain threshold on your dice, or you needed to win a fight and only have exactly one life left, which is like hard to do. And the thing about the game is engineering those moments, even though we use things like dice, they're completely manageable and doable. It's how many of those moments that you can have, right? So like, I'm gonna go buy this thing here, and what does this say? It's like, oh, I can, after I roll a die, I can move a die, anyone's die, an enemy's die, and I'll prevent, and I can prevent damage. So maybe I'm in that situation where I need to win a fight, and I need to win exactly at one. Well, crap, I have shields. He rolled damage, the NPC rolled damage, and now I'm shielding that damage. Well, maybe I'll move one of their dice down so it deals me even more damage, but I still win. And you have these moments where you're like, oh, look how clever I am. I was able to engineer this really complex series of things, which oftentimes, if you can do that, you can even at times like trigger multiple feats. Once again, with the intersectional thing, and that's a big part of the game. Like the game kind of like sets the stage for these moments, things that are hard to do, feats, like they are feats, and when you achieve them, and especially if you achieve them in a cool way, you achieve them in an efficient way, you feel super rewarded, smart, and you get to progress in your story. But then we also have encounters.
Yeah, and that's where things get weird. At the end of every one of your turns, you are adjacent to these little encounter nodes, and depending on what planet you're on, you'll draw and resolve the top card of the encounter deck. Now, these are story cards, and oftentimes they may have just like a one-shot effect or whatever it is, but sometimes depending on the zone that you're in, whether it's near a settlement or near the outland, as we call it, you'll have a different kind of outcome for that encounter, right? So every one of these decks is sort of tuned to its own ecology for that planet and the different people and personalities that you might meet on that planet, right? So, for example, let's say that you're here on Theria, you're near this settlement, you're here as Mandarax, right? And the buddy pods are going to come up, right? And this is a weird encounter. I guess most of them are.
What's the entry on that guy?
T15A, right? So
Okay.
we have our little story guide. So in this encounter, you come across this little buddy pod, and it shows up and it's like, hello. I'm the buddy pod.
Read it. Let's just do it, man. Let's just read it.
We're just going to read the whole
We're
thing.
going to read it.
All right. A blocky, rust-colored pod rolls over to you, flashing you a wide grin in its unnervingly human face. Non-denominational greeting to you. I am Buddy, the friendship pod, and I do voices sometimes, and I need to help you save. Oh my goodness, I can't even read. And I need your help to save my family. A strong, happy organic, just like you, is required to awaken my family from administrative mandated sleep. Administrative mandated sleep. I have one of those every night. One of its eyes projects a hollow image of an underground warehouse full of thousands of pods like Buddy, all resting inert in rows. So in this particular encounter, you have three options, and sometimes it might have a flat effect or whatever. Sometimes it might just do a thing. But in this particular one, we have three choices, and it doesn't really give you the full context. You don't really know the exact outcome of this choice as you're choosing it. And in fact, this is going to refer you to this encounter guide here. So I can choose to agree to help Buddy, I can alert the authorities, or I can run a diagnostic. Buddy Pod seems so nice, so helpful. I'm just going to agree to help. So that'll be entry 1 in this section.
You follow the buddy pod down to a shady underground bunker and see row upon row of its inert compatriots. A few easy commands into a console on the wall, and the pods all awaken. They chant in unison, "Non-denominational greeting. We are pleased to meet you." So then we get into like the mechanical stuff. So here's what happens. You've acquired a new lifelong friend. You gain 1 infamy and gain card C4 from the reserve. Pow! Show this off.
Yeah, we're gonna do it. So infamy is like a card that you can get a little status. And in a vacuum, there's no reason for players to fight each other, right? But the more infamous you are, the more important it is for other players maybe to take you down. The whole goal of the game is to become a legend. If you're taking down other people that are more infamous, then you can actually get more incentives. So this kind of changes the incentives of the game as we go, right? But in this case, I'm going to get a card from a zone called the Reserve. This is just like, it's basically just half the components of the game that we don't really use, and they're only called on during encounters in specific situations, and they change the game in some way. Maybe they're adding cards to encounter decks or whatever, but in this case, I have The buddy pod. This thing looks so creepy. I can't handle it. It has a human face. This is a gear card that I'm going to get. He's my new friend. Even if I don't want him. So this card goes into my hand, and I can play this card and just do cool things with him. Right?
And now I'm going to read the rest of what happens. And it says, Tranquility Settlement, which is this little landmark over here. It's kind of the biggest, it's like the town in the game, has gained entirely too many lifelong friends. Shuffle card R7 from the reserve into this deck's top 3 cards.
Cool.
So now we're going to add an encounter that's going to come in here and it's going to pop up, and we're going to see the outcome, or let's just be honest, the consequences of Mike's decision or poor decision to help awaken the buddy pod. Yeah. So then we're going to have, people are going to inevitably go here, have some encounters, and then that's going to come up.
My favorite part about this is that, like, that I've seeded these buddy pods, whatever they are, whatever is happening, but it may actually not even be me that has to suffer those consequences, that's always hilarious to me. I love it when somebody else pays for my terrible choices. So in this situation, we have the Buddy Legion, and let's say down the road somebody drew this, right? You draw this card, has the same unnerving illustration as this one does, and it says, Theory is overrun with a multitude of buddy pods, which some poor fool unwittingly reactivated. That was me. I did that. They become a menace, swarming over every power source as they scramble to maintain their energy reserves. Some have even begun wearing eerie sapient masks in an effort to blend in. So whenever you draw this, you discard all your gear and advance the bounty tracker, which is another thing we haven't talked about, right? Then you draw and resolve another encounter. Basically, it drains your power cells. You lose all your gear, you just discard it, you can recover it later once you recharge it. And then you have to have another encounter right afterwards, which could be terrible. Who knows? Maybe it's good, right? So, and then this card it goes away. Maybe sometimes certain cards will get shuffled back in, or they might have a third chapter or whatever. But it's kind of an idea of like what one of these encounter cards can do. And there are 2 other options on this card, right? That's half of the card, and then the other half has 3 other options as well. So like you can start to see that each of these cards in the encounter deck is just the first, like the seed, the first chapter with a lot of possibilities for every one of them, right? So I mean,
one of my very favorite things are these placeholder encounters. So like each character, there's 6 of these. There's 2 in each planet's deck, and it's a little personalized story. Some of them are kind of just like throwaway experiences, like, oh, you bump into an old friend, or like, oh, you happen upon somebody or some weird thing. Some of them actually give you a lot of insight into the character's backstory, or a character's motivation, or a character's past, things that happened to this character before they arrived on this planet, and it gives you some insight. And those are neat because those happen almost every game. Yeah. Some amount of them happen, but it depends on which character draws them, on which planet, in which order. So it's like this really clever use of just like a very simple component, right? It's just a placeholder. I mean, quite literally a placeholder.
So the end product of this is, as you make your choices in this world, you are just, you can choose to focus on one thing or another. Whatever it is, you're advancing some different storylines. You have your personal storyline that's making permanent changes to the game. You have these encounters which are causing kind of rippling effects, and as a result, like all the layers start to just come together, and every game has its own unique kind of tapestry, right? So, the challenges of that are that, like, you have to make sure there's no overlap, though. Like, everything has a certain continuity to it. Like, you have 130,000 words of, like, little bits and pieces of story that kind of modularize together. And, we were talking the other day about, making sure that, one of the characters, it's possible for them to die in one of the story outcomes, NPCs, right? So it's like, oh, well, that means we can never use them in any other story outcome, right?
Yeah. And some of the encounters are just things like fights. Like you'll encounter a thing, and even the thing that you fight, will have a description. Yeah. I mean, and some of those things are terrifying. Some of those things are ridiculous. Like, there's little robots that were like meant to be bellhops at this like casino, and then they don't have jobs anymore. So like their whole administrative purpose is getting tips. So like, they just start robbing people because that's the only way they can. They're trying to like manufacture the notion of getting tips, right? So there's lots and that is like one of my absolute favorite things. And this is like you get to peel the skin back on this world and see little pieces of it. But the whole time you're doing this, like there's actually a really mechanically compelling. It's not just like I move and then like something happens to me. It's like I'm going to set up this really complicated, cool combo moment I've built out this kit of stuff that makes me like really hyper specialized in some part of the game. I have goals that I'm going after. I'm doing my damnedest to not get pulled into the gravity of this be seduced by all the cool things that are going on in the game. And to win the game, right? And what's interesting is like the thing that we've seen when we've shown this game to people is like, if they lose the game, they're less upset about losing the game than they are. They want to know what happened to my guy. Like, where did this story go? We shuffled a card into this deck. What was going to happen with the buddy pods? We didn't ever see that. That didn't pop up in this particular session. Right. So, which is an incentive to play again. Which is incentive that the next time that happens, when you see it come to fruition, it's a cool moment.
Exactly. Yeah. And another thing is like as these encounters, I mentioned earlier, they change the context of the world, right? So some of these might actually introduce new scoring objectives, or they might change some of the rules in some way, depending on the choices that you've made, right? Those cards kind of stay out, and then at the end of the game, what we do is part of final scoring, we're going to look at the end of the little guide here, and there's like a little checklist of things, right? So you have all these different possibilities. So you're going to check for each of these conditions in this endgame resolution section, and any of those that you mark off, it's almost like an achievement system. Like people were having a good time in playtesting. You can put your date, you can put the player that unlocked it, and you're going to look through, and each of these different conditions has its own entry at the end game. So basically, you build your own end game cinematic, which has been really fun. Like people really like them. If you've completed, for example, Piers Falkray's Chapter 3B, he completed his whole storyline, so you have like a closure to that, and it tells you like how Piers's actions and his pursuit of his storyline changed Theria and the system forever, right? And I mean, some of them are pretty inspiring, some of them are pretty dark, so depending on what things come out, you can have a really different like a shape of this world in the future.
And we even have like one thing we talked about earlier was the bounties. So the bounty is just kind of this pinata that sits out. Yeah. It's a hard fight to win. Mm-hmm. You can, instead of having an encounter, you can encounter the bounty, and there's things other encounters will say advance the bounty. Mm-hmm. So every time the bounty advances, it gets a little better, it gets a little juicier. But if the bounty advances too far,
then they will escape.
Yep.
And the escape entries, again, every bounty is unique. It's its own little unique character. It's one of the billions of named things in this game, right? So once it escapes, you're going to open that encounter guide up, and there's a whole section specifically tailored to that card, and it tells you what happens because you didn't, hunt down that bounty. And maybe one of the characters escapes off world and goes on a spree of crime or something like that. There's just a lot of different weird outcomes on those. So.
Yeah, but it's yet another moment of
another layer to that cake we're making, right?
So Mike, let me ask you a question.
Mm-hmm. I love questions.
You do?
Yeah.
So, what are some story games? What are some moments in story games that you've had that are memorable? Other story games, like have you played a game where like you there was a particular thing that you really remembered or that you thought was really cool or like really rich?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think overall, like players of story games are going to look at this and they're going to say, "Oh, kind of like that game." And there's a lot of little pieces here. I think we're doing it on a scale that's absurd. It's a
unapologetic.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Like, right. So I think there's that. But like, you'll see a lot of the building blocks and pieces, and a lot of those. My favorite moments are the ones that I use to kind of inspire a lot of these systems and stuff, right? For me, like Robinson Crusoe is like it's a strategy game. It's like a pretty deterministic, but you have those moments that are really cool when you make a choice early on, it shuffles something into the deck, and you draw it later and you go, oh yeah, this, I remember that. And it's the same way with the Buddy Legion, right? Those are always like really fun moments. Those always like those stay with players. They get the feeling of satisfaction that they made a meaningful change in this world, and that change in this world had some kind of impact, maybe on their experience or maybe on somebody else's, right? Yeah. If you had to discard all your cards to the Buddy Legion that I activated, I would laugh so hard. I would never stop laughing. So, what about you?
Oh man. So one thing I really like, I actually like, and this game does a good job of like actually providing context, but I think it's also cool in some games that are a little like less dense as this, where like they kind of paint a picture and you get to impose a little bit of your own perception of maybe like what's going on. So like a game like Oath, it does that where it's kind of open ended and you can say like, oh, my interpretation of these actions and these decisions are that this happened, this story happened, I did this thing and then this person came to be or whatever, and I like that. I like that in a lot of games. I feel like that exists in like quite a few games. I think that's a neat thing. It's not something we necessarily utilize, but another game that I think is really really cool is Sleeping Gods. Like Sleeping Gods, the way it went. It's telling a story, the way that it's trying to capture like a feeling of emotion, a personage, if you will, is really kind of like beautiful and meaningful and deliberate.
That's another world that feels like really lived in, right?
Yeah. It's like very deliberate. I mean, I really like Near and Far too. I thought that was like a neat storytelling game. But Sleeping Gods for sure feels like it's doing something very very well, very very thoroughly. So that would be mine.
Yeah, that makes me want to go play games. Should we go play games?
No, it's very late.
All right.
I don't want to do that.
Well, let's high five anyways. Good video.
Bow.
No, that was
I missed. One more time.
No, it's too late.